I spent 31 years working as a psychiatric nurse, and in all that time, the one thing I learned, the thing that never left me, not even after I retired, was how to read a room without saying a word. I learned to watch for the small things, the way someone shifted their weight when they answered a question, the way a smile didn't quite reach the eyes, the way a hand rested too carefully on a surface, like it was being controlled. I never thought I would need that skill for my own daughter. Her name is Rosalind. She was born on a Tuesday in late October, during a rainstorm that knocked out the power to half of Columbus, Ohio. The nurses had to use flashlights. She came into the world loud and furious, and for most of her life, that's exactly how she stayed. Loud, sure of herself, the kind of woman who walked into a room and people turned to look, not because of how she dressed, but because of how she carried herself. She had her father's stubbornness and my common sense, and I used to joke that combination made her practically invincible. I was wrong. I met my son-in-law, Walter, at a 4th of July cookout at my neighbour's house. Rosalind brought him, and I remember watching them walk up the driveway together, her hand in his, laughing at something he'd said. He was tall, clean-cut, the kind of man who remembered to compliment the cook and helped carry chairs without being asked. He worked in commercial real estate, made decent money, had his own condo near the short north. He seemed, by every visible measure, like a good man. He told Rosalind she was brilliant. He told her she was the most interesting woman he'd ever met. He came to her gallery opening. She was a graphic designer, freelance, building something real, and he stood in front of her work for a long time, longer than anyone else, and then he found her across the room and said, loud enough for me to hear, "You made all of this?" Like he still couldn't believe it. She lit up. That's the only way I can describe it. She lit up the way people do when they finally feel truly seen. They dated for 2 years. He proposed at Christmas, at the kitchen table in my house, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. He cried a little when she said yes. I handed him a napkin and thought, this is a man who isn't afraid to feel things. That matters. The wedding was small. 40 people, a venue in the short north, October again. Rosalind had always loved October. My son-in-law's mother, Harriet, no. Let me get that right. Walter's mother. I'll call her what she was, his mother. She sat in the front row and wore a hat with a brim so wide it blocked the view of the people behind her. I noticed it, but said nothing. A hat is a hat. The first year of marriage things seemed fine. Rosalind and Walter bought a house in Clintonville. She kept her freelance work. He got a promotion. They came to Sunday dinners. They went on a trip to Savannah for their anniversary. When I called my daughter, she answered. When I asked how things were, she said, "Good, Mom, really good." I believed her. It was small things at first. The way she started apologizing for things that didn't need apologizing for. She'd called to say she couldn't make it to my neighbor's birthday dinner because Walter had made plans for them that weekend. Fine. Couples do that. But then she missed my cousin Bertie's retirement party. Then Thanksgiving with my sister's family in Cincinnati because Walter thought the drive was too long. Then a Saturday afternoon coffee with her best friend Paulette, who called me separately to ask if everything was okay. She cancelled again, Paulette said. That's the 3rd time. She texted, not even a call. I filed that away. I am, after all, a woman who notices things. When I started seeing Rosalind in person, I watched her differently. Not obviously, she would have bristled at that, accused me of looking for problems, but I watched. The way she glanced at Walter before answering certain questions, the way she prefaced opinions with "Walter thinks," and then told me what Walter thought, as though her own view wasn't available anymore. The way she'd gotten quieter. Not calm quiet, careful quiet. There is a difference, and I know it intimately from 31 years of recognizing it in other people. I told myself she was adjusting. Marriage changes people. 2 lives becoming 1 life requires negotiation. I told myself I was projecting. reading pathology into ordinary partnership. I told myself that for almost a year. The dinner happened on a Saturday in March. Walter's mother was visiting from Cincinnati, and Rosalind had cooked a full meal, the kind my daughter used to make when she wanted to show love: roast chicken, roasted vegetables, a peach cobbler from scratch. She'd texted me that morning, "Pray for me, Mum," with a laughing emoji. I assumed she meant the cobbler. Rosalind burned cobbler sometimes. I arrived at 6. Walter's mother was already seated at the dining room table, wearing a pressed blouse, and the expression of someone waiting to be disappointed. Walter was in the living room watching a game on the television. He stood when I came in, hugged me, offered me a drink. His mother looked up and gave me a nod that was technically a greeting. Rosalind came out of the kitchen with a serving dish, and she looked tired. Not the tired of cooking all day, the tired that lives behind the eyes. We sat down. The food was beautiful. Rosalind had set the table with the good dishes, the ones we picked out together at a store in Grandview 2 years ago. I noticed she hadn't touched the wine in her glass. His mother spoke first. "The chicken looks a little dry," she said. She hadn't tasted it yet. I kept my face still. Rosalind said, "I hope it's okay." I tried a new brine this time. Walter said nothing. We ate. I talked about my garden, about the new library branch opening downtown, about a documentary I'd watched. Walter's mother answered when spoken to directly and volunteered nothing. She cut her food into very small pieces and ate slowly, as though performing the act of tolerating the meal. Then Rosalind said something small. I don't even remember the exact words. Something about a project she'd landed, a new client, a company that wanted a full brand redesign. She was proud of it. I could hear the pride, the first real brightness in her voice all evening. Walter's mother said, "That sounds like a lot of work for what it probably pays." Rosalind's face didn't change. That was the thing. It didn't change, and that was worse than if it had crumpled. She had been trained not to let it change. "It's a good contract," Rosalind said quietly. Said his mother. And then Walter said, without looking up from his plate, "You've been distracted lately. Things at home have been slipping." The table went very still. Rosalind said, "I'm sorry." "The dry cleaning, the appointment you forgot to reschedule. I'm just saying, before you take on more work, maybe think about what's already not getting done." I set my fork down. I set it down very carefully, on the edge of my plate, the way I used to set things down in the ward when I needed to keep my hand steady. Rosalind said, softly, "I've been very on top of things." "That's not how I see it," Walter said. And his mother looked up from her plate, looked at my daughter, and smiled. Not a kind smile, a satisfied smile. The smile of a woman watching something she had expected to happen. Rosalind lowered her eyes. That was the moment. That right there. I had seen that posture before, in waiting rooms and intake evaluations and support groups, and I knew exactly what it meant. I knew what it had taken to produce that posture in my daughter. That specific combination of someone who used to be loud and furious and sure of herself, now making herself small at her own dinner table, in front of her own good dishes, over food she had cooked herself with care. I did not raise my voice. I have spent 31 years not raising my voice in rooms where people are in pain, because raised voices accomplish nothing except to make the person in pain feel responsible for the chaos. I picked my fork back up. I took a bite of the chicken, which was not dry at all, which was in fact the best chicken Rosalind had made in years. I turned to my daughter and I said clearly, "This is wonderful. You've always known how to make a house feel like a home." Walter looked at me. I looked at him. I am 63 years old, and I have looked into the eyes of people in genuine crisis, and I did not look away first. His mother made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. I finished my dinner. I helped Rosalind clear the table. In the kitchen, with the water running and Walter in the other room, I stood next to my daughter, and I said, in the same voice I used to use in the hospital when I needed someone to really hear me, "I see it. I need you to know I see it." She didn't say anything, but her hands stopped moving. I went home that night. I did not call Walter. I did not call his mother. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and I wrote down everything I had observed over the past year, with dates where I could remember them, with specific incidents, with the names of people who had witnessed things. Paulette, my sister, my neighbour Carol, who'd seen Rosalind at the grocery store 6 months ago and called me to say she seemed different somehow. Then I made one call. I called a colleague, a woman I'd worked with for 20 years at the hospital, who had spent the last decade running a domestic violence advocacy organization on the east side of Columbus. Her name is Thomasine, and she picks up on the second ring at 10 o'clock at night, because she has built her life around not letting calls like mine go to voicemail. "Tell me what you've got," she said. I told her. All of it, the isolation, the diminishment, the systematic erosion I had watched happen to my daughter over the course of a marriage, slow enough that each individual piece looked like nothing, fast enough that when I looked at Rosalind, now I could barely find the woman she used to be. Thomasine listened without interrupting. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "She needs to be the one to reach out to us, but you can be the bridge." And then she told me exactly how. I called Rosalind the next morning. I asked her to come over for coffee, just the two of us. She came on a Tuesday in the middle of the afternoon, and she sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around her mug, the same way she used to sit when she was 16 and had something she was afraid to say. I didn't push. I've learned not to push. I just sat with her, and after a while I said, "I want you to look at something." I put Thomasine's organization's information card on the table, just the card, no speech. Rosalind looked at it. Then she looked at me. Then she looked back at the card. She said, "You think it's that serious?" I said, "I think you're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, and I think you know what's causing it." She was quiet for a long time. She drank her coffee. She turned the card over in her fingers. Then she said, very quietly, as if testing the words for the first time, "He told me last week that I embarrass him in front of his colleagues. I didn't say anything wrong. I was just talking, just telling a story, and after they left he sat me down and told me I talked too much and made him look bad." I kept my hands still on the table. "He went through my phone," she said. "He said I'd been texting Paulette too much and that she was a bad influence. He said that before, about different people. At first I thought he just meant specific things, but now I don't really have anyone left to call." She stopped, looked at the card again. "Mum," she said, "how long have you known?" I said, "Long enough that I'm ready to help you the moment you're ready." She called Thomasine herself, that same day before she left my house. She stood in my front hallway with her coat still on and her hand shaking a little on her phone, and she made the call. I walked into the other room to give her privacy. I heard her say, "I think I need to talk to someone." What followed wasn't fast, and it wasn't simple. I want to be honest about that, because I think we do women a disservice when we make it sound easy. Rosalind didn't leave the next day. She spent 3 months working with an advocate, understanding what she had been living in, understanding that the word she had been avoiding, the word that felt too large, too serious, too dramatic for what was just criticism and isolation and control, was in fact the right word, and that naming it correctly was not an overreaction. It was the beginning of being free. Walter's mother called me once during that time to tell me I had poisoned the marriage by interfering. She said her son was a good man and that I had never given him a fair chance. I let her talk. When she was done, I said, "I hope you have a good evening," and I ended the call. Walter hired an attorney. Rosalind hired one too, a woman Thomasine recommended who had seen cases like this many times and was not impressed by Walter's real estate salary or his mother's opinion. The divorce took 8 months. It was not easy for Rosalind. There were nights she called me in tears, not because she wanted him back, but because she was grieving the life she had believed she was building, the version of him she had loved in the beginning, before she understood that man had never entirely been real. I want to tell you something about grief like that. It's legitimate. Loving someone who hurt you doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. And the grief is part of the healing, not a detour around it. Rosalind moved into an apartment in the short north, 10 minutes from where she'd started her career. She painted the kitchen yellow. She called Paulette, and Paulette answered on the first ring. And they talked for 2 hours. And then they made a plan to go to Savannah together in the spring. The trip Rosalind had always wanted to take, that Walter had never thought was worth the drive. She picked up her freelance work again. The brand redesign she had mentioned at the dinner table, the one his mother had dismissed, the one Walter had used to diminish her, became one of her best projects. She sent me a photo of the finished logo and wrote, "They loved it. I loved it." She runs in the mornings now. Not because anyone told her to. Not for any reason I understand completely. But she said once that when she runs, her head is quiet in the right way, which is different from the quiet she had learned to keep in that house. I'll take the difference. 3 weeks ago, she called me on a Sunday morning, and she said, "Mum, I've been thinking about something." I said, "Tell me." She said, "I think I want to volunteer. At Thomasine's organization, I think I want to sit with people who are where I was." I said, "I think you'd be very good at that." She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "I learn from the best." I didn't say anything to that. I just stood at my kitchen window, looking out at my garden starting to come back, and let the moment be what it was. I spent 31 years learning how to see what people couldn't say out loud. I hope you know that you are allowed to say it. I hope you know that someone in your life, or someone at the end of a phone number, is ready to listen. And if you're not sure your story is serious enough to deserve help, I promise you it is. The small things are how it always starts. That's what makes them dangerous. What city are you watching from? And if this story reached something in you, please say something to someone. Your life is worth more than keeping the peace. I keep thinking about that dinner table, the good dishes, the roast chicken that wasn't dry, my daughter's hands going still when she heard his voice say the things it said. I've thought about Walter a lot since then, not with anger, though I won't pretend anger was never part of it. I've thought about what it takes to become the kind of man who diminishes the person sitting across from him at dinner. Nobody is born doing that. It's learned. It's practiced. It's passed down at tables just like that one by women like his mother, who smile when they should flinch, who nod when they should stand up. The cause of what happened to Rosalind wasn't just Walter. It was every moment in his life when someone told him by word or by silence that this was acceptable, that this was strength. That's the thing about cause and consequence that people often miss. We want to trace it to one villain, one decision, one night. But it's never just one night. It's a long chain of small permissions. And what breaks the chain is someone, somewhere, refusing to give the next permission. I refused. I want to be honest about what that took, because I think we do a disservice to women when we make courage sound simple. I am 63 years old. I have sat with people in crisis for 3 decades. I have the training, the language, the contacts, and I still sat at that dinner table and finished my meal before I acted, not because I was afraid of Walter, because I knew that a scene in the moment would have given Rosalind nowhere to land afterward. Justice without strategy is just noise. That's what I mean when I say that doing right by someone you love requires more than a good heart. It requires knowing when to speak and when to wait. It requires understanding the difference between reacting and responding. Rosalind needed me to be useful, not just outraged, and being useful meant being smart about it. What I am most proud of, more than the call to Thomasine, more than the card on the table, is the conversation I had with my daughter on a Tuesday afternoon when I simply sat beside her and let her find her own words. I did not tell her what she was living in. I let her tell her what she was living in. I let her tell me, because Rosalind had to be the one to name it. She had to be the one to reach for the card. She had to be the one to make that call in my front hallway with her coat still on and her voice shaking. That took more courage than anything I did. I think about who Rosalind was before all of this. Loud, sure of herself, the woman who walked into rooms and people turned to look, and I think about who she is now. She runs in the mornings. She painted her kitchen yellow. She called Paulette back. She is becoming herself again, which is a harder thing than becoming someone new, because it means recovering something you were told wasn't worth keeping. She did that, not because someone rescued her, because she decided she was worth the effort of her own recovery. I spent 31 years watching people find that decision inside themselves. It never gets less remarkable. And if there is anything I know to be true after all of it, it is this. The people who come through the hardest things are not the ones who never broke. They're the ones who broke, looked at the pieces, and chose with clear eyes and a steady hand to put themselves back together. Rosalind chose. I just made sure she had somewhere to land when she was ready.